A monopoly or an oligarchy controls many sectors of the U.S. economy. An American Economic Liberties Project study from back in February shows the so-called illusion of choice for consumers. This particular image boils down just how many beer brands are owned by one single conglomerate.
So how do we get to a consolidated economy? It's a topic for a friend of the show, David Dayen's latest book, Monopolized: Life in the Age of Corporate Power. David is also the executive editor of the American Prospect. He joins us now via Skype to share more. David, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. David, tell us a little bit about why you decided to write the book. I think it's a topic, near and dear to both Crystal and I and to much of the audience. Just tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I think I wrote it for two reasons. One was, there's a great literature right now about antitrust, monopoly, economic concentration, all kinds of great books out there. A lot of them focus on the history, or they have a bunch of numbers, and you have to learn something called the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, and you have to, they're very technical. I felt like what was missing was just talking to people about living through monopoly. Just how their lives are affected by having this overwhelming concentration in a sector that they engage with on a regular basis. Whether they are consumers, whether they are entrepreneurs, whether they are workers, any way that they intersect with monopoly. And that was the first impulse. So I went around the country and talked to people about that circumstance. And then the second thing was, since the sort of consumer welfare standard was put in place in the 1970s by the Chicago School, monopolies are really thought about largely in terms of price. How much a monopolistic company can pay for or charge for a certain product. And I wanted to look at all of the things but price that affect people in their daily lives. Whether it's about wages, whether it's about democracy, whether it's about the fragility of supply chains, which is something we're seeing right now through the pandemic, all of the ways in which monopoly harms people in their lives that have nothing to do with how much they pay for something. So those were sort of two impulses.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with the first piece of that, which is the way that monopolies impact people's just day-to-day lives when they're interacting with sectors that have massive economic concentration when they may not even realize it. Just talk about some of what you found.
Sure. So, back when we could actually tour the country, I was able to do so. I went to Iowa and I talked to farmers who are struggling with big agriculture, people in North Carolina who live next to these giant concentrated animal feedlots and the unbelievable impact on their quality of life. I went to Tennessee and talked to people who don't have reliable internet access. So Chattanooga, Tennessee has actually the fastest broadband in the world. But if you go 2 minutes outside the city limits, you cannot get anything better than a dial-up, and people go to Starbucks parking lots with their kids to do their homework, to catch the Wi-Fi there. And the reason is that Big Telecom put a law in place in Tennessee that said you cannot go as an electric company, because in Chattanooga it's done through the Electric Power Board. You can't go outside your service area to serve broadband. So you have this just incredible anomalous situation. I talked to people in Ohio who, whose families were victims of the opioid crisis and all of the monopolies that led us to the point where we have that terrible crisis. So there are ways in which this manifests itself that I think are not normally talked about. I mean, there's this bias of talking about big tech when you talk about monopolies, and that's in the book. But if Amazon, Facebook, and Google were broken up tomorrow, we would still have a terrible monopoly problem in this country. And I wanted to talk to as many people as I could who were living through that.
And I think one of the most important points that you've made so far, David, is about it's not just about price, and that way of thinking about price very much just obfuscates how much power people have in a society. Why is it important in a democracy to talk about private power, and how have we thought about it in a historical context, as we have in some of our history?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could argue that the initial stirrings of monopoly was entirely a fight against private power, against economic liberty, against the ability for someone to use their talents and be productive and a contributing part of society. And that was broken off by large monopolies who forced you to work within their structures. I mean, you see that most clearly now with Amazon. So these Amazon third-party sellers used to be, the entrepreneurs who would figure out something in their basement. Now their basements are full of, rubber ducks or something, and they try to sell them on Amazon. They have to go through Amazon's private government, private law that they've put together to govern their marketplace, and it's an incredible imposition on people who are just trying to make a living in a small business. It's some of the stories are unbelievable. There's just this wild west out there of people sabotaging each other's listings and things like that. And Amazon, while forcing everyone to govern to their standards, stays out of these other parts of the whole ecosystem. So it's like a digital Somalia. And if you get thrown into sort of this Amazon private jail where your account gets suspended, it's almost impossible to get out. You have to go through this Byzantine layers of different requests. And at the top of that is what they literally call a Jeff letter, which is you have to send an email to Jeff Bezos. So you have to send an email to the richest person in the world in order to get your small business back in business. It's really unbelievable.
That's actually insane.
That is totally insane. A Jeff letter. That is nuts. I mean, one of David, I think the more important trends in American economics since somewhere around the 70s is that the share of GDP that is going to workers is declining, right? The share that's going to corporate profits is going up and the share going to workers is declining. How does market concentration play into worker power ultimately?
Oh, it plays in a major way. If you have fewer, I mean, they call it monopsony. It's sort of the flip side of monopoly. If you have fewer producers who are bargaining for your labor, then obviously there's little chance of you being able to get better wages and benefits and things like that. There's also sort of artificial things put on that structure, like no poaching agreements, where you have to sign a letter when you start your job saying that you won't go to a rival company. And this has become deeply embedded in employment contracts in places that it's absurd. Things like janitorial services or fast food companies. Like if you're working at the Jimmy John's, you can't say that you're going to try to get a job at the Wendy's across the street because of the trade secrets that you have from the Jimmy John's. It makes no sense, and it's done entirely to suppress labor. So you see this in a number of different places, and then of course the concentration that you get from corporate profits being held in fewer and fewer companies. Also, it happens on both ends. So at the bottom, you're not seeing workers with enough power to bargain for more wages, and then at the top, there are fewer and fewer people gaining all the profits, and so the gap widens and widens.
Yeah, so interesting. Congratulations on the book. Everyone should go pick it up. If you've got time, you should be reading this book. Dave, it's always great to see you. We appreciate you.
Thanks, David. I can't wait to read it.
All right, thank you.
And we'll have more Rising for you after this.